Hello everybody. Looks like we're all up and running. I think so anyway. So welcome to this week's Friday Live. It's 5 o'clock in the UK. It's Friday and it's Crackerjack. You'd have to be from the UK and to have grown up in the 70s for that to make any sense to you. But look it up, you know. It's an integral part of the growing up process of Gen X people who come from the UK. Crackerjack. Today we have got what hopefully is going to be an interesting little show for you. We have a very pretty apple to paint, but I've set the apple slightly back into the shadow so that most of the edges around the apple very soft. So the demonstration today is all about edges. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the colors to paint this apple. I'm going to simplify it, you know, as we normally do, using the amazing ChromaMagic app. I'm going to put all the colors down so that it's pretty much there, you know, in terms of a color block-in, say, and then I'm going to soften every single edge. I'm going to soften the whole thing, way more than you would think. And then I'm just going to gradually tighten up some of the edges a little bit until the form pops, okay? The reason I'm doing this today is because anyone who's been on live critique sessions with me in any of my workshops will know I'm always going on to people about softening edges, especially in the shadows, okay? Hard edges in the light, soft edges in the shadow. But generally speaking, no matter how many times I say it, people still have too many hard edges in their paintings. Okay? Faye, you must be from the UK. A Crackerjack pencil, she says. Yeah, I'll send you a Crackerjack pencil. But if I had any Crackerjack pencils, I'd send you one. Okay, so people still use, most of the time, too many hard edges to paint. And soft edges are the key to really bringing depth and life into your paintings, okay? So instead of the usual way around of doing things where I might be presented with a painting by someone that has too many hard edges, and I go through and I say, why don't you soften all of these? What I'm going to encourage you to do this time, even if you don't do it today with this paint along, even if you do it like on a different piece of work, is try a sketch. And then watch the way that I'm going to soften this. Soften everything in the whole painting, and then just gradually, a little bit at a time, decide where you want the edges to be slightly harder, okay? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the colors in the subject. So I'm going to rock along pretty quickly with mixing the colors and drawing out this time, because I want to get to the fun part as soon as possible, which is the edge handling. Okay. Nice apple from the local farm shop. I think it's a Cox. But notice, like, all of these edges, even on the photo, they're all pretty fuzzy, right? But they're not all the same. Like this edge over here, that shadow area there. Can I turn that grid off? What's that grid doing on there? Turn it off. This edge here is very, very soft there and a little bit harder there. This edge is a little bit harder there and softer there, right? This edge here of the apple, slightly harder than the left-hand edge. There's almost no hard edges in this painting at all, in this subject at all, but maybe a little bit up here where the stalk sticks out. So I've deliberately set this up and shot it so that all the edges are soft. The next thing we want to do is we need to think about the overall environment. So we're mostly like black, basically, in a lot of the background. Slightly lighter here, around here, like the tabletop values. Obviously they change quite a bit. This is a nice thing about ChromaMagic. You can set the sample size, look, to get a more general impression. Over there it's about a value 4, value 5. Over here it's going to be like a 6. Maybe even a 7 in places. Don't care about the color, I just care about the value really and the chroma. But this is interesting, right? Because we need to decide where this apple is in light and where is it in shadow. So here is the terminator. right down there. So this side of the apple is shadow. And look at this, we're down really low down in the value scale. So for most of the shadow side of the apple, we want this beautiful, warm, red orange. Really, really low in terms of value. This is the bottom of the value scale, but the chroma is quite high, it's quite intense, right? The light-hand side, we've got a few different colors. We've got reds, oranges, you know, mostly around value 5, value 6. Around here, we've got more oranges and yellows, and then we've got the white of the highlight. Okay. It's not too complicated from a color point of view, really. Let's switch to the panel. And I can catch up on everybody who's here. How is it going, everybody? It's good to see you. And let me tell you something about this panel quickly. I thought I was going to be using a 5x7 ampersand panel today, as I normally do. You normally use ampersand panels for these. It's such a nice surface, but I've run out. And the only ones I've got loads of texture modeling paste on them for a workshop that I'm in the middle of teaching at the moment. So this is a canvas panel, lead primed, lead white primed, except that it comes from Jackson's, and this is as they are out of the box. Now, I normally never paint on these without putting another layer of lead primer on them and leaving them a couple of weeks to dry. Today I can't do it. So we're just going to go with what we've got. It'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. Duncan, you're from the UK too, right? I can see all the UK people talking about Crackerjack in the comments in the chat. Good to see you all. 6 o'clock in Bruges, Dominique says. Almost pizza time. It's almost pizza time here, but we're not quite there yet. Hello, Laura. Nice to see you. Hello, Ertie. Hello, Matthew from Costa Rica. That's very cool. Let's talk about colours. Lead white. Ignore those ones for the minute. So if those two colours there weren't on my palette, what I would have is lead white, raw umber, and ivory black. All very low chroma colours. So the lead white and the ivory black, sorry, the raw umber and the ivory black are mostly there to drop chroma. These two, I've got green gold and transparent red oxide. Both high chroma, both transparent colours. They are for the shadows. So I can send my shadow colours more towards a red orange. Oh, which is of course exactly what we need for the shadow side of the apple, right? But if it gets too red, then I can add a little bit of the green gold and put it back towards yellow. But obviously my palette is not complete yet. I think I'm only going to add 2 more colours today, though. Obviously we've got a lot of yellows and oranges to do, so I'm going to add quinacridone rose. And the reason I like a blue red like this is because if I pair that with cad yellow, it gives me a really broad range of colour. From a blue red through right the way through to a yellow with all of the red oranges in between. Okay, I think that's probably all we're going to need today. Most like. So let's see if we can get this drawn out. I'm starting with raw umber and a little bit of white. Oh, I forgot to mention, regular viewers will be used to this, of course, by now. We've got to oil out the panel because this is really crucial, because the edge softening thing that we're going to do, what's a better word than thing? Technique. The edge softening technique we're going to use works really, really well if you have, this is linseed oil. I'm using Michael Harding refined linseed oil with a small amount of solvent in it. I'm using Gamsol. This is a makeup sponge, but you can use a brush for this just as well. Dab it in that oil and then coat the panel. Makeup sponge is good just because you get a nice even kind of covering very quickly. But here is the crucial part, right? Then we wipe it back. That's too much oil. if you paint into that, your brush will be sliding all over the place. You have loads of oil on there, right? So we need to wipe it back. Basically, err on the side of wiping more back rather than less. Because if you end up with too much oil on there, it's a really, really unforgiving surface to paint on. The paint just slides around all over the place. You can't get it to cover. It's a pain in the neck. So wipe as much off as you can. Now I'm going to use a little hog for drawing out. What's this? A size 2 apparently. Cornelison hog. Well, it's actually Robertson or Robertson, which is basically the same company. Yvette, the panel is 5 inches by 7, so it's quite small. It's not too big panel. Looks like we're all good. Okay. So I'm going to draw out, I'm not just going to draw out the apple, I'm going to draw out basically shapes. So kind of light and shadow shapes, if you like. That's what I'm after more than anything else. So what I want first is, let's get the highest point of the apple in, which is over to the right a little bit, and it's quite high up in the reference, say about there. The lowest part probably comes down to about here-ish, furthest right. Going to be about there, furthest left, about here. And then I have a nice shadow shape running up this way from down near the bottom right. And then we have, that's maybe a bit steep, we have the cast shadow of the apple. I might have gone a bit too far right with that, I think, possibly. What do you think? I think I've gone a bit too far right. It looks wrong at the moment. I think it's probably more like there. Apple cast shadow here. So this is like our light shape. Let's get our apple roughed in. It doesn't really need to be perfect for the sake of what I want to show you, but let's try and make it at least something like the apple that we've got there. So I always, when I'm blocking something out like this, I hold my brush like this very, very loosely, and I'm kind of waggling it. And you can make, this is a good thing to practice doing, so you can make good straight lines. Really helps you basically to make a straight line blocking. So I'm just kind of scrubbing the paint on. Ooh, it seems like it's sucked up a lot of my oil. We'll have to see how this goes today. And I'm immediately going to divide my apple into light and shadow, okay? So let's just we'll work out the structure of it first, because we've got the top part of the apple, which is almost kind of a flat area you can imagine on the top of the apple there, right? And then there's the little indentation in the middle. So let's get that in. And then I'm going to divide light and shadow. So this, everything to the left of this is all shadow. Everything to the right is light. I know there's a lot of different colors in there, but if you can figure out how to divide something very generally into just light and shadow, understand the basic structure, and then divide it into just light and shadow, you're going to have a much easier time painting. So again, shadow shape. This is the shadow shape. I'll mark them in, I'll fill them in just a little bit just so you can see what I mean. Like these are the shadow shapes, right? So this is light. Okay. Obviously there's a deep shadow in there, but then you also get you get a little bit of light there, so you need to leave that. All right. I mean, that's pretty much all we need to rough out, really. So I'm going to go straight in with Nice big brush. Cornelis and Hogg, size 8. Black. Let's put a little bit of raw umber in it as well. A little bit of transparent red oxide, actually give it a bit of chroma. I'm going to establish the environment that the apple is sitting in before we do anything else. Just kind of get it all. The world that the apple is living in. You know, I like to get these colours in early on for a couple of reasons that will become obvious. It really helps when you're judging colours to have most of the background in and established. Gets a little bit lighter down here because we can see a little bit of the table. So this is raw umber with a tiny amount of white in it, right down to the bottom of the apple. And you want a big brush for that, right? Because, you know, it's almost all the same. Huey says, I just bought ChromaMagic. Yay! How are you finding it, Huey? How are you finding it to get along with so far? You find it useful? Hi, Matthew. Good to see you. Michelle says, I don't think I'll be trying this one in watercolor. Yeah, Michelle is the for anyone who doesn't know, Michelle is the genius who developed and wrote the ChromaMagic app. Let's mix color for the front. So what were we? We're like a value 6 over here and a 4 or 5 over there. So I'm going to mix raw umber and white to a value 6. Put a little bit of black in it as well. Yeah, and then you know, she makes this amazing app, and then she shows up to the live streams and does them in watercolor. And I wouldn't mind, but she does, her watercolor versions are better than my oil versions. I'm not kidding you. So there's quite a lot of variation here in terms of color, but we don't need to be putting all of that in. Probably want a little bit more chroma in than that, so I'm going to add a little bit of transparent red oxide. Just a tiny bit, and then a tiny bit of green gold, so it doesn't get too... Oh, that's a bit too much chroma, maybe. We'll see. We'll put a bit of black in it and knock it back. A bit more white. Have we got a value 6? Remember, we want a value 6 here. I think I'm going to let my tabletop go a little bit more kind of greenish, because I kind of like that actually, because it's going to show off nicely against the oranges of the apple. I'm just going to scrub that in, scrub. I was teaching somebody yesterday, one-to-one session, and we were just talking about a lot of what we were doing was, this is another thing that I see people do a lot, is use the same brush like right the way through a painting. What tends to happen when you do that is that this is just adding a bit of raw umber to it on this side so it gets darker. What tends to happen is that you get the same finish right across the painting. So I used a big brush for this to get a nice flat finish. I'm using a smaller one now, so I get a little bit of texture coming in. Now what I'm tempted to do right now is immediately start softening those edges, but I'm not going to yet. What value have I got over there? It's not really dark enough yet. We want to be like about a 4 or a 5 over this side. You know, just whack the colour in for now. It doesn't really matter too much. Over here we want like about a 6. That could be a little bit lighter. None of this is really crucial at the moment. You know, we can change it as we go along. But with the values are pretty much there. You know, we've kind of roughly sorted it out. So next I'm going to put in shadow side of the apple. So I know I want a strong red orange. about a value 2, right? It's going to do for pretty much the whole of that shadow. Let's really simplify it down and do it all the same. Now, transparent red oxide, this is the Michael Harding one anyway. Out of the tube, it's about a 1.5, so I want it to go a little bit lighter, but I don't want to lose any chroma. So I'm not going to lighten it with white, I'm going to lighten it with a small amount of yellow, cad yellow, just a little bit. Let's have a bit more of that mixed up. Until it comes up to a value 2. Now this is the nice thing about having this value scale and the ChromaMagic app, is that you can translate those values. Obligatory caveat, you may not always want to paint exactly the values you see, but if you ever struggle with values and if you're learning, this is a brilliant way to circumvent a lot of the mistakes that people will make at the beginning of their learning journeys, which is why I always show you the colors at the beginning. Shadow side of the apple. Slightly tricky for me to paint like this because this panel has more texture than the ones I normally use because it's a canvas panel. And if I do a downward stroke, you get all of that glare. See that from the light? So I have to kind of do a lot of sideways strokes. So we make sure we get the right color in there. Just simplifying right down. Get the shadow shape right. Where else have we got shadow around here? This shadow shape as well we'll put in. You know, doing it basically as simply as possible with just shadow and light. Let's put that, get a bit of black in and put that dark value we've got in there. And that little indentation in the apple there. So a couple of colors, I'm probably just going to mix a couple of colors for the light. There's a nice strong red over this side. The value is about 5. And the chroma isn't the highest we can possibly get, but it's high, you know. So I'm going to go transparent red oxide. Now out of the gate, this is about a value 4 if I remember right. No, about a 3. So I know I want to bring this up to about a 5, value 5, which is here. So I need to bring in a fair amount of cad yellow. But it's going to turn very orange, but that's cool because that's what I want. It's going to be very, very, very strong. We just keep going until we hit the value we want, about a value 5. Now this is hard to see the value of. I have a little free course that I do on color for people when they sign up to my email list, right? The link is in the description to sign up. Or you can just go to my website and you can find this thing there. Actually, I don't think the link to that little free course is in there, but I will add it later. I ask people who sign up, what's the thing you struggle about with color the most? And you know what people say most often? It's being able to judge the value of high chroma colors. I'm making sure I put plenty of paint on here, by the way, because we're going to do some softening. If you don't have enough paint on there, if your paint is thin, what happens when you soften it is you do lift some paint, so you need to make sure that you've got enough on there, or you'll kind of get into trouble a little bit. So between that and the shadow, see, this is away from the light a little bit, that area there, so I'll mix that with a little bit of the shadow there. That's nice strong red. You see, this is what I was talking about with the quinacridone rose and the cad yellow. You You can get some very high chroma reds. That might even be a little bit too high. Yvette says, Paul, once you finish each painting, do you clean your brushes right after? Immediately. I'm a bit of a goody two-shoes with my brushes, but that's why I've got some of them that have lasted me literally decades. Immediately they're done, I wipe them off, and then I take them and I wash them with olive oil soap and warm water and nothing else. That's it. Hello, Thomas. Good to see you. Thomas is here too. Lovely. There's a Hammershy exhibition in the US, is there? Hammershy at SMK. Oh no, is this because you're traveling, Kathy? Sorry, I'm trying to catch up on the comments. Hammershy is literally one of my favorite painters in the world. I think his paintings are just amazing. I saw a retrospective exhibition of his work in London a long time ago, and it was just knocked me for six. He's been living in my head ever since. Just catching up a little bit on the comments. Heather's out of panels. She's watching because there's no Crackerjack this week. Crackerjack's not still running, is it? Surely not. Just looking for questions. Sandra says, what colour is green gold? Is it towards yellow or green? It's a very yellow green. So you can use it in mixes, like if you put it into any mix which is more orange, it will send it more toward yellow. So it will make it more of an orange. If it's a red on orange, it'll make it more of a yellow orange. So a good way to think about colours is in terms of the hue and how they affect colours in the mix. So say I had a red orange around here. Green gold is somewhere around here. My yellow chip has fallen off, but green gold would be somewhere around here. So if I want to pull something which is this colour round towards this way, more towards an orange, then I use something on the other side and it will pull it that way. That's why I like the green gold. So it functions as a yellow and a green, depending on how much you put in. Huey says, Paul, do you have any videos on understanding value better? I have oodles of videos on understanding value better, to be honest with you. If you go to my YouTube channel, right, and you can search inside people's YouTube channels for keywords, have a look for toilet roll. I kid you not. That's probably my favorite value exercise. But honestly, just put value in, or values, because I've done a load of videos that talk about values more. So yeah, there's loads of them. You could probably be busy for a few months just on the free videos I've got in there on the YouTube channel. Oh yeah, Michelle says, how to see colour as value was how I found Paul in the first place. Yeah. So I have oh, that's funny. I remember that video, yeah. I've got a video up on that, but also things have moved on since then. I want to show you something. Just quickly, for anyone who finds it difficult to judge the value of a high chroma colour, let me mix up a little bit more of this. So we've got some on the palette here. I'm going to make the palette full screen. It's always a little bit worrying when I do this because sometimes I forget to switch back and I'm painting and I'm saying, right, I'm going to do this bit now, and everyone's like, Paul, you need to change back. The camera is on the palette. Okay, we've got a nice strong orange red. Pretty difficult to judge the value of that, right? What is it? Is it a value 5? Is it a 5.5? Is it a 6? So I'm putting little dabs on, right? But it's very hard to judge because the chroma is so high. Guess for me. Tell me from these little dabs, if you can see enough on the screen, tell me which would you choose? Which value do you think is the right one? This is 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5. Here's a way that you can tell. If you get your phone out, you can switch it to grayscale. This is an Android phone. There will be a different way of doing it, presumably, with an iPhone, for those of you who are a higher class of person. But look, and then just hold it over your scale. Can you see all of those dabs now? So it's definitely not this high, is it? That it's darker than that. It's lighter than the 4 here. It's a 5. Probably between a 4.5 and a 5, but it's about a 5, right? There's the dab of paint. There's my finger, weirdly huge. Nice little hack. If you have trouble checking the values of colors, you're trying to mix a particular value and it's a high chroma color, or even, indeed, if you're looking at the object itself. What about you're just looking at the object and you want to know what value the local color is? You can do the same thing with this value scale. Here's the actual apple. Hold the value scale over it and then do the same thing with the phone. Find out what value that really is. Really, really handy. Few I remembered to go back. What was I doing? Oh, we need some more yellows, right? I need a bit more colour out here. I was a little bit stingy with my paint today. So we need all of the rest of these orange yellows in here. So the slightly tricky thing about this apple is that it's not one colour all the way over. Obviously, there's a lot of variation of colour. But we don't hit the lighter yellows and the yellow oranges until we get to the light part, just this area that I haven't quite done yet. There's a couple of bits we're going to have to be kind of a little bit careful about as well. But we can do, like, once you've got the main kind of areas in, you can do a lot of the rest of it by eye, like still simplifying. Like around here, we're going to be about a value 6, and it's going a little bit more yellow. So I tend to do these colors like this fairly quickly. Like, is that a 6? Man wants to go a little bit lighter, probably. That's probably about a 6 now. Yeah, I'd say that's about right. So all of this area here, you know, it's in the light, so I'm managing the values, right? So it's going to look about right. I know that's about the color that I want there. It's about the right value. And then as we move further over, we get gradually lighter still, and we get more yellow in the mix. We've got a little bit of like almost pure yellow here. Before we go back to the oranges again, moving up to this bit here. So I'm banging in the colors really quickly, right? But hopefully you can see that they're pretty close to the photo, you know. With time, people get a little bit snooty about Munsell as a whole, to be fair, but also using any kind of aid or helper. You know, people say the same thing about grids or using calipers or anything like that, that it's a crutch is a word you'll hear people use a lot. Fine, if you want to make life hard for yourself, then be my guest. But using something like the ChromaMagic app to help you calibrate your perception system to be able to judge color better is not going to make you a worse painter. It's going to make you a better painter more quickly, as long as you don't come to rely on it entirely the whole time. So Michelle herself will say, a really good way to use it, I'm just quickly mixing up a color for that kind of what do they call it? The little bit of the apple where the, well, I can only describe it in color terms, like the chroma drops. That's a bit dark, I think probably. Should be maybe a little bit lighter. Little bit. There's a word for it and I can't remember what it is now. That bit just the other side of the little indentation where the stalk is, where the colour drops a little bit. There is a word for it. I just can't for the life of me remember what it is. We've got a bit too much paint in there, so I'm trying to be a little bit careful, like with these very dark values in the kind of that shadow area, the dark bit of the apple. So if you squint now, those colours should look something like pretty close. I need to modulate a little bit between the light and the shadow here, or that's going to be too abrupt. That brush has become contaminated with a low chroma colour, so I'm going to change to a fresh one. Because we want lots of nice high chroma here. So I'm after something between the shadow colour and the light. So tricky working on this horrible panel. Too much texture. We've got a bit more, we're going to, I'm just doing a bit of adjustment of the colours now. It feels like we're going a little bit more kind of greenish maybe around here. Bring a little bit of the green gold in. But I'm not actually mixing any of these colours. Should I put the highlight in now? Let's put the highlight in as well. Fresh brush. I'm going to use just white and I'm going to put a small amount of yellow in it because it will be affected a little bit by the colour of the apple as well. Oh dear, I'm having a bit of a problem with my lead white at the moment. I'm using the Old Holland one and I just wanted to try it, but I've got to say I will never ever buy this paint again. Because now I'm getting to the bottom of the jar. It comes in a little pot. And it's getting gradually stiffer and harder to paint with. But there's still quite a lot left. You know, I'm a bit disappointed. I'm just going to soften that, blend that edge a little bit. Right, okay. So I think we're pretty much there in terms of colour. Let's sort out our cast shadow is a bit too high here, so let's sort that out so it comes properly in. No edge softening yet, right? All of the colours are pretty much, they're just sort of sitting there. Not really done any blending, but hopefully, you know, even at this kind of hard edge stage, is enough for you to be able to see that the colours are something like right. Would you agree? Yeah, lots of people were guessing 5 on the value. See, you're brilliant at this. You're all brilliant at it. Roxy got it. Kathy got it. Chris got it. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so I have got a special softening brush. This is a watercolor wash brush. Really, really soft, synthetic. Okay. Lovely, lovely, lovely brush. It's about 1 inch across the ferrule, so it's quite a big brush. Let me just catch up a minute on the comments. Good point, Michelle. Michelle says, what's the alternative way to learn? Floundering about randomly until something sticks. I mean, kind of, you know, to be fair, that's the approach a lot of people take. But I'm also just going to say straight as well, is that the people who are the most annoyed by something like ChromaMagic or, you know, other methods of of finding colour more reliably, a lot of them are teachers. I wonder why that is. I wonder why it annoys them so much. Just putting it out there. Let's do some softening. Now, how do you go about this? Sorry, you've got the pressure is really, really light. Okay, so there's my hand, right? And I'm just I'm holding the brush really loosely at the bottom. If I just allow it to rest on the palm of my hand and then pull it very gently. I don't want to like with a hard pressure across the surface because I'll lift a lot of paint, right? So just just let it fall and then drag. Wipe it off, keep wiping. I'm going to soften everything, the whole thing I'm going to soften now. I've got to be a little bit careful with the direction of my strokes. Just because of the cameras, I've got one camera either side of the panel. No hard edges will be left. I may have to change brushes soon because obviously I'm picking up some of the paint and some of my background is getting into my apple. The whole thing, just softening it all until we end up with like even that highlight. I'm going to get a fresh brush out now though because my softening brushes. This is another really soft synthetic. It's got too much paint on it. So you have to be a little bit careful. The paint does build up on them. Soften the highlight, which is kind of working, but I've got this horrible paint, so I'm going to have to restate that at some point, I think. So I'm looking to get to a point where I have no hard edges anywhere in the painting. Soften this. And I don't mind if it bleeds. Oh, I do mind that. I don't mind if it bleeds across a little bit. Hard edge down here, we've got to get rid of this one. And it's actually, to me, it's already looking more lifelike. I've got to get rid of any hard edges here as well. I've got one tricky one. I'll probably get a fresh brush out for that. Can drag that paint up there a bit, but I need to make sure that I don't have a hard edge here either. So this has to be softened too, which is slightly tricky because I don't want the dark value to bleed into the light. But okay, that's all right. That's soft now. Looks very different though, doesn't it? A little bit too hard here. So this, I mean, softening like this takes a little bit of practice, but you know, you can get it. You can. A good thing to do is to set a panel up. I wouldn't do it on a canvas panel like this. I'm kicking myself a little bit that I didn't actually have an ampersand panel to do this on, but it's working out all right, you know. I'm still managing to soften everything. So anywhere, I'm gradually softening all of the edges. So anywhere I can see anything that looks remotely like a soft edge, I'm going to have to change the colour a little bit. Here, do a bit of adjustment on the colour, I think, around this area. It's got a little bit. Shadow colour is dragged in a little bit too far. You could almost leave it, right? Couldn't you? And say, oh, well, that, you know, I'm going to call that done. So the reason I think this is a really good thing to try, because I would very rarely see paintings from people when we do critique sessions where everything is softened to this degree. But to me, this looks more realistic now. This looks more lifelike and more realistic than it did before. But you have to get that, you have to have that oil layer on first, right? There is a guy who paints like extremely soft paintings, like still does a lot of small still lifes. Neil Carroll, really beautiful work. He's really good to look at for someone who softens almost everything and then just brings in a little bit of hard edges here and there where he wants to. I'm going to do a bit of correction of the colour here and there. This works, honestly, this sounds like such a bad excuse, but it works better on an ampersand panel because it's smooth, you know. I'm just losing my yellow a little bit, so let's bring a little bit yellow back in. So I still want to make sure that my form is looking about right and the colours are about right. Obviously, each time I do that, then I've got to go back in and soften it again. Because what I want to do, instead of like what you would normally do, probably, which is like start off with all hard edges and then think about, right, what do I need to soften? This is like the opposite approach. Start off with all soft edges and then think about what you might want to make harder. And the reason I'm suggesting you do this is because it will encourage you to soften everything first. This is, to be fair, Michelle, this is something I don't think you could really do in watercolor, could you? Very easily. I mean, oil paint lends itself to this kind of thing because it's you can pull it around so much. But if you can get a painting and you can soften it to this degree, then you will have all the edge softening skills that you need. So I'm just going through basically all of my soft synthetics. Very, very, very light pressure. I say it does take a little bit of practice. I'm just trying to make sure I get all of the colours about right. I'm going to have to put the highlight back in. But that, in a way, that's no bad thing because the highlight actually is one of the few hard edges that I'm going to want anyway. That's pretty close, I think. So where do I want, let's start with the background, right? Where do I want to start selectively bringing in some harder edges? Well, for this area here, you know, I've massively softened the area between the shadow and the light. So that needs clarifying a little bit. So this doesn't really look much like a shadow at the moment because it should be slightly harder here and then get softer as it gets closer. To the apple, right? But it still doesn't want to be really, really hard. Slightly harder edge. Can probably bring up the value a little bit there as well. Just down here. A little bit of texture. So this one as well, I want it to be a little bit harder here than it is over there. So I need a darker version of that color. Oh, got some black on it. Go a little bit lighter as we get closer, we get further over to the right, and I'm going to let it get a little bit harder here at the bottom of the apple. It changes the feel, doesn't it? But even that bit I don't want to be too hard. You know, it's still a shadow. So we want it a bit softer over on the left-hand side. Still soft when it comes under the apple, but a little bit harder. Isn't it funny that, like, the difference that makes to the apple feeling like it's sitting in space? You know, this is starting to feel like a plane now, and that's just the edges. It's just the edges that I'm changing there, nothing else. Oh, I guess you could argue values a little bit, but not much really. Haven't actually changed anything on the apple at all. This is all still really, really soft. But we started off with a really clear light and shadow side, and that's still, you know, that's still there. The clarity of the light and the shadow side is still there. I'm going to put that highlight on. Maybe I should try. I'm half tempted to try putting it on with titanium, but I think it might be a little bit too harsh. But this white it's not flowing nicely. It won't go nicely onto the panel. I'll try adding a bit of oil to it maybe. Trying to put just a little bit of oil in it. So hopefully you can see, I've left that hard. You'll see people do this a lot on highlights on things as well. The apple is shiny, but it's not that shiny. And what's responsible for making something look shiny is the edges of the highlight. So if that was ceramic, I would want to keep those edges really hard. But it's kind of, it's not exactly satin, it's not exactly really, really shiny, it's somewhere in between. Running out of soft brushes to do softening with now. This is a Kolinsky sable, I think. So I'm just going to soften the edges a little bit and leave it a little bit harder up round there. Okay, I'm going to bring in we want a bit of an edge like across here, just before we hit the indentation in the apple. Not really, really hard. Small changes. So that helps you see to read that bit as an indentation now that we've got a slightly harder edge on the front part of that apple. Right. Please note that none of the edges around the side of the apple have been harmed yet. I haven't done anything with them. Okay, all I'm doing is tightening up the drawing and bringing in a few hard edges here and there. Let's bring this up a little way to clarify the shape of the apple. Because what's also happened, of course, when I softened all of those edges, my apple grew a little bit. It got a little bit bigger. But I'm putting a hard edge here between the apple and the tabletop. Let's make it a little bit clearer with a slightly higher value. All still soft. Everything around here is all still really, really soft, isn't it? Edges. Hugely important. You need a bit higher value in there. So now I can just make a few little changes here and there where I need to. Kind of feel like I could pretty much call it done at this point. I mean, from a point of view of the demo, what I wanted to show you, I've covered it really. I'm going to play with it a little bit more because this is what I always think of as like the fun. This is the fun part of a painting, where you've got it all established, and then you're just looking for little changes that you can make here and there that are going to make it work better. Like a slightly lighter value there. Slightly harder edge on that cast shadow there, help it to stand out a little bit. I'm going to bring that in, the occlusion shadow a little bit darker too. And they give you so much, they're responsible for showing form. And they're really important from that point of view, but they're also like, they add poetry. Getting the darker value in for the occlusion shadow here. Occlusion shadow is just that area underneath where no light can get. Need a bit more colour in here. So the apple is kind of emerging from shadow. Let's bring a little bit, very slightly higher value, really slightly higher value into the shadow here, so that we can just see it against the value of the shadow. But that definitely needs to be soft because we're in shadow here, right? So this needs to be softened still. What if we made this edge here a little bit harder? Not too much, just a little bit. Bring this dark value of the black in. And just as this part of the apple comes out to the light a little bit there, I'll put a bit of a harder edge in there. Oh, we've got some horrible glare on it. Sorry about that. I've got to try and do sideways brush strokes to take the glare out. So I'm gradually, little bit at a time, I'm bringing the form out a little bit more. But each change that I make to the edges has a huge effect on the painting, right? Even like very small changes to edge have a really big effect on how you read each part of the form, each part of the painting. Soften this a little bit, that's a bit too hard. Just going to redraw that a little bit, cut into it because it's of a funny shape now. Oh, too dark. Almost lost my nice edge there with the value. Isn't it interesting? All of the colours were there at the start when everything was hard. And then everything was soft and it looked pretty beautiful at that point, but it was a little bit, everything kind of went a little bit vague, if anything. And now gradually bringing the form out just through edge control. It's so important. It's not just a case of softening an edge here and there or doing it as an afterthought. It's central to everything you do when you're painting. You know, I see paintings from people where quite often the colours are really good. The values are great. You know, might even have some nice texture in it, but all of the edges are the same and it just kind of flattens everything. So you want to think about edges as kind of a scale in the same way that you think about values as a scale, where you've got your high values and your low values. I'm just doing value adjustment now. I'm playing basically. I've finished the demo. I'm just I'm having a bit of fun now. I'm playing with the painting. So, you know, values, you've got like very low values, very high values. It's second nature to think about values in terms of a scale, right? But you can also think about edges in terms of a scale. From very soft to the point where you almost can't see them, to hard. And you can play with them in the same way that you can play with values. You don't have to use the edges that you see, especially if you're working from a photo. In fact, I would argue that most of the time you don't want to paint the edges the same as you see them. You want them to, most of them to be softened to some degree. Almost all of them to be softened to some degree. And you'll end up with much more lifelike result. Does this all make sense? Am I making sense? Does watching it happen on a painting help you to kind of, I hope anyway, get the message a little bit more about edges and their importance and the difference it makes, difference it can make to your paintings if you give them the attention that they need and deserve. Simon says, I missed the start. Why the textured panel? Because I've run out of my favourite ones, Simon. I really didn't want to use this panel today. It's a nightmare because it tends to it accentuates the brush strokes, and I get a lot of glare on from the lights that I use, which is it's a real pain. So I've had to use even more sideways strokes than normal in order to try and work around it. Sandra says, my apple's looking like a persimmon. So Laura says, crazy good how that one hard edge near the stem made the apple sing. Yeah, so, you know, this, what I'm encouraging you to do is to try this. Have a go at it. Set up something small. I mean, you know, if you're in the school, obviously you've got the use of this reference photo. So you can use this reference photo to do it. Use ChromaMagic to make sure that the colors are pretty good, you know, that you've got good colors going down. And then, you know, that your values are right and all the rest of it. And then just soften everything. Get yourself a nice, don't use a textured panel like this, especially with the horrible primer that they put on it. Just soften everything until there are no hard edges left in the painting, and then start putting them back in. And I think you'll find you'll end up with a very different result than you will get if you start off with hard edges and soften a few. And just to see a painting that you're working on be comprised almost entirely of soft edges, I think would be a really good, just a good experience, a really good learning experience for you to see really, you know, how much difference it can make. Okay. I hope you enjoyed the session today. Sandra says, is the glare to do with the direction of the canvas weave or the light in the studio? It's the light in the studio. So I have two lights either side of my panel, horizontally shining in, which most of the time works really well, because basically I have to have steady light for the cameras. Otherwise it all falls apart, you know. I used to try and paint under natural light, to stream under natural light, and it was a nightmare because the cameras massively over emphasized changes in the light. Thomas says, a little reflected light onto the table. Yeah, you could. I mean, I would say, Thomas, do this, and you put that reflected light on there and see, you know, what you think. But be very, very careful of the chroma, because if you add too much chroma in the reflected light, you won't end up with something that looks more realistic or helps the painting. You know, it's very easy to overstate something like that. Simon says, thanks for accommodating us watchers. It must be tricky remembering to change the brush strokes for the camera. It's not, to be honest, because over on a screen on the other side of the room, I'm monitoring the stream. And it's the only way that I can see when I get something wrong, you know. When I say I get something wrong, I mean, like if suddenly I put something in there and there's a lot of glare like that, you know, I put that in and instantly I can see the glare. So I know I need to go in with a softer brush and pull it slightly sideways in order to get it, you know, a little bit better. But a fun exercise. Do try it. Soften everything. What you need, the main thing you need is, well, to be fair, I used quite a few of these because I was struggling with the panel, but usually one of these will do, like a great big soft synthetic watercolor wash brush like this, a watercolor background brush like that works really, really well. Get the colors, right, put them down, and then soften the whole thing and just bring in a couple more edges and see what it shows you about edge control. Okay, it's pizza time. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. Don't forget, tune in every Friday at the same time, 5 p.m. UK time, for a funky Friday paint along. And if you want the reference photo and you want to be able to post your paintings on the community, private community, not Facebook, right? I'm so glad I moved off Facebook. My community is on my own platform now that I run. Members of the school, of my online school, get the community, basically, which is the main reason to join as far as I'm concerned. A bunch of really lovely people who will help and support you. And a load of courses that teach you all of this stuff in depth. And access to the reference photos, the materials list, and a critique session once a month. There's a link in the description for the school if you want to go and check that out. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming. And I'll see you all again very soon. Bye for now.